aggregated in a few hands, and the republic is destroyed.
New world order. Everybody, millions of
By working upon the prejudices of the people until the wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed.
The earth riches and wisdom. So we have even right there.
What's his name?
This is an emergency transmission from FEMA Region 6 in occupied North America.
There is a war. It's happening now. It will decide the fate of humanity. The time to choose sides has come. We are the resistance. We are the Infowars. The Russia situation, as I've been saying the last few months, is deteriorating, and I said that they would probably try to partition the eastern half for Russia, the western half for Western-backed Ukraine. That may be a staged event at the highest levels between different arms of the global crime syndicate. Now, let's just say that that's what we hope's going on. Because as bad as that is nothing in comparison to if this is real. Now, again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. What I am is really a historian and a man who is street smart. I'm a lay studier of history and how humans operate. And there are no fewer than 30-plus examples in the last 200 years in Eastern, Western, Southern Europe of powerful empires making backroom deals to act like they're fighting with each other, but to divide a country in 2 or 3, 4 parts sometimes, more than 4 parts. So that's the standard play. One of the last famous examples was Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin made a deal right before World War II to act like that, well, Germany's coming to protect ethnic Germans in Poland, and Russia's coming into its side to protect ethnic Russians in Poland. They'd made a backroom deal that came out at the end of World War II to divide the country between each other. That may be what this is. Unfortunately, my gut tells me it's not. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And let me expand on that. If this is not staged, we've gone from a 10% chance in my gut estimation last Friday, 2 days ago for nuclear war, to about a 20. We've got about a 40% chance, maybe 50. You're going to see armor from Ukraine openly fighting Russian armor and helicopters. In fact, it looks like it's already started. So I'm being very conservative here. I'm not a military analyst. Most military analysts are on the Pentagon payroll here, or they're on KGB/FSB payroll if you see them on Russian television. So they're not going to tell you anything that resembles reality when you're watching military analysts on CNN or Fox. I am also a lay historian of military affairs, as you've noticed, and larger geopolitical machinations, and I've read the books of Brzezinski and many others. And I've interviewed a lot of top experts you've heard over the years, former generals, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, former top CIA analysts, and others. So this is a realm I'm informed in. That doesn't mean I have all the answers. So I do want to open the phones up today to get your take on the Ukraine situation, and we'll cover these headlines when we come back. Then we've got an LA Times article. I remember 3 years ago, drudgereport.com, just giving credit where credit's due, linked to an article we did where the Texas Utility Commission said that it would basically double Texas power prices if Obama shut down these Texas power plants. They did it. The power doubled. It's more than doubled where I live. I mean, it's incredible. I have trouble paying the bill.
Celebrate the spirit of freedom and liberty upon which our nation was founded at InfoWarsShop.com. Molon Lave is ancient Greek for come and take it. This popular design combines both classic Greek Spartan imagery with modern M16 assault rifles. Now available in women's tees and proudly made in the USA. Celebrate the spirit of 1776 with the George Washington brass belt buckle or this incredibly sharp-looking 1776 hat. Badass. And be sure to check out the new arrivals at Infowars Life, where you can prepare your body to perform at peak levels with Survival Shield, Nascent Iodine, Super Male Vitality, and Fluoride Shield. And wake up, America. Immune Support Blend is the healthy choice for the gourmet coffee lover. So get incredibly high-quality, freedom-based products and help fund the revolution at InfoWarsShop.com.
And we are going to kick off the transmission with news so important, so off the chart incredible, so unbelievably dangerous that out of everything I've ever covered on air in 19 years, this is undoubtedly in the top 5 most important developments. And you'll notice most of the top stories, the most important news I've ever covered from the last few years. In the past, I never really talked like that, but every few months now, earth-shaking events are taking place when you geopolitically, militarily, economically, culturally understand the context in which they are happening. I've never been to Russia. I don't have any Russian ancestors. I believe the Soviet Union was a great evil of collectivist socialism and communism, and basically what the U.S. is adopting today. That said, Russia is in a holding position, collapsing, basically, trying to stabilize their plunging population growth levels that are negative. They have 1.2 Russians for every 2 people that die. And they are not offensively causing any problems. China is taking over the whole world, working with the globalists, and the banks that have hijacked the U.S. are actively involved in economic warfare against the American people and lobbying to break up our families, raise our taxes, disarm us, destroy our borders, and make the Constitution null and void and let the president operate as a dictator. That was all over mainstream headlines last week. The Republican Congress saying that Obama is abolishing the Constitution. Finally, the Republican House, not the Congress, is telling the truth. That's the only hope we've got. So with that backdrop, let me go over the headlines here dealing with Russia. First, before I get to the latest headlines, let me just show you Friday's headlines here. If you're a TV viewer, you can see this on Infowars.com/show or PrisonPlanet.tv. Radio listeners can just search whatever I'm reading here, and you'll find it. This is CNBC. Russia wants to start World War III, Ukrainian Prime Minister. This is Friday. Ukraine Foreign Minister ready to fight Russia, AP. Ukraine helicopter hit by grenade taking off. Bloomberg reports Putin warns of consequences as Ukraine steps up offensive up to the Russian border. Kerry warns Russia of expensive new sanctions. S&P, Standard & Poor's, downgrades Russian government currency and bonds down as a destabilization effort. Russia says it's an attack on them and will engage in economic scorched earth in Europe. That's the Wall Street Journal reporting on that. Now, continuing. What's the West doing? How traders can prepare for worsening Ukraine crisis. CNBC, how to make money off of it. So that's the headlines there on that front. Now, let me give you the new headlines, and you can make of these what you want, and then I'll go over my take on this, why this is such a big deal. Here's a nice headline up on Infowars.com from the Project Syndicate publication. Top U.S. diplomat, U.S. has betrayed the New World Order, or the current plan for global governance. Let's move on to the next headline. Russia denies aircraft violated Ukrainian airspace, ABC. Satellite images reveal massing of 15,000 Ukrainian troops, hundreds of tanks around the cities that they're invading on the border of Russia. They're in eastern Ukraine, Slavyansk, and others. Here's another one. This is out of Reuters. Ukraine rebels free Swedish hostages. Obama seeks unity against Russia. These are real headlines. Moving closer to war. Paul Craig Roberts, former head of Department of Policy at the Treasury, father of Reaganomics, breaks that down. Obama decries thugs in Ukraine, Russia provocation. That's in AP. Pro-Russian militants take over TV station in Ukraine's Donetsk. Russian jets probe Ukrainian airspace again as tensions rise. Christian Science Monitor. Ukraine blames Moscow for human shield detentions in the east. Okay, so that's some of the headlines right there. I'm going to be very calm about this, but also very clear and deliberative for everybody. Does everybody know what happened in Ukraine? How this started 3.5 months ago? Please forgive me if you're a long-time listener and you hear this constantly and know this. We have a lot of new listeners. People need to understand this because I have people come to me on the street saying, you know, Putin's evil, Russia's evil. Are you ready for war, Alex? Are you going to be a peacenik like you always are? I'm not a peacenik. If somebody actually attacks us, I think we should attack them with a full force. The State Department, and I've played this clip probably 10 times. I'm not going to play it again today. You can just search engine. Deputy Secretary of State says $5 billion spent in Ukraine. Color revolution. Or State Department spent $5 billion in Ukraine. That'll pull up the video of her a few months ago saying, quote, we spent $5 billion in Ukraine in the last few years to overthrow their government, their elected government. Now, if the country's half Russian, basically, been part of Russia off and on for hundreds of years, the East has always been part of Russia at any one time. The Russians have their pipelines and military bases there. And the West goes and arms a bunch of thugs to blow up police stations and bomb military bases and take over and calls them freedom fighters. And then now they're moving into the East, kicking people out, mayors that are elected, things like that in cities that are basically Russian. And the Russians, Lavrov, their foreign minister, said last Wednesday, he said, if you keep doing this, we're going to move our military in to protect Russian citizens and Russian ethnics. The response of the Ukrainians are to attack multiple cities with attack helicopters, tanks, you name it, including every day they report scores of civilians being shot in the street. They pull checkpoints over. If you got a Russian last name, boom, they shoot you in the head.
Do you understand how dark it is? How far down the line we are? How late it is?
What you need to know is that back in 2008, on 8/88 during the Olympics, the West launched an attack through NATO on Russian-held areas since the 50s, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and blew up Russian military bases. And the Russians responded by bringing tanks and armor in and mobile ICBMs. And I've talked a lot about this. It's just to understand what's happening currently, you've got to know what's going on now. So in my book, when you attack Russia, that's a criminal act. It's not America doing it. It's the globalists controlling our country. Now, they have overthrown the Ukrainian elected government, calling them freedom fighters on our news. The new nationalistic government that's in charge is very anti-Russian, and I don't blame the Ukrainians, a large portion of them, not liking the country of Russia. Russia's occupied them off and on scores of times and did a lot of horrible things under Lenin and Stalin to them, killed more than 10 million Ukrainian kulaks, or Christians. But the globalists and sociologists are accentuating all these differences and all this animus, just like they have racial divide here in the U.S. that the Democrats stir up. MSNBC, engaging in divide and conquer. So it's the same story here yet again. And so there's no discussion in the media, the controlled press in the U.S. or England or even Europe, about how we got here. The West spent $5 billion. Well, the State Department did alone. Others spent a lot more money, too. NGOs and George Soros groups, separate from that, spend hundreds of millions conservatively, to overthrow the government violently, call them freedom fighters, and then Russians in Russian cities where they're 75, 85 or more % Russian, they don't want to have their mayors and people that are elected beat up and overthrown and their TV stations taken over. So their police have not been standing down and letting the Ukrainian military come in. And so now the Ukrainian military is invading all these different cities. And, I mean, smoke on the horizon, burning buildings, dead bodies, checkpoints. And the Russians are starting to mass troops on the border, saying we will protect Russian interests if this continues. And we've now gotten to the point where Fox News in England, Sky Television is what it's called, but it's owned by Rupert Murdoch, is talking about imminent Russian invasion. And so is the news here in the U.S., and they're talking about partitioning the country in two parts. Now, here's the good news in all of this. There is a low probability chance that this is a stage deal set up months ago at Davos, and this has happened before, just like Hitler took one part of Poland and Stalin took the other, and they acted like they were fighting each other, but really, before World War II, it was a deal to divide the country. That's later been admitted. This could be a deal like that, where Russia just takes one part of the country up to the river and up to Kiev, just like that happened with East Germany at the end of World War II. That's what empires do. They'll act like they're fighting, but actually just divide things. I don't see that. This looks like this is real. The West has been trying to overthrow the Russian government. And again, people are like, what, you like Putin? It's not our business. He's not attacking us. Putin isn't lobbying to take my guns. George Soros is. George Soros is lobbying to overthrow Russia. So that's what all of this comes down to. So I want to hear what you have to say coming up in the next segment. If you live in Ukraine, you live in Poland, where U.S. troops are massing with NATO troops last week. If you live in Russia, you'll have to dial your regular, computer phone number and then call our toll-free number. That is the weekend phone number. It's 877-789-2539, 877-789-2539. And I do this every few weeks on this topic specifically. I want to hear from active duty military or military retired or contractors, people that have been in Ukraine. Do you disagree with my take on this? I'd like to hear from you. 800-25-99231 is the weekday number. That number doesn't work on the Sunday show. We produce this all out of house here in Austin, Texas. So it's 877-789-ALEX. And just dial your country code and all that and call us then at that number. I'd like to hear from you, 877-789-ALEX. Or you can call us international, 512-646-1776, 512-646-1776. And I want to hear from folks in Russia, people in Eastern Europe. But this affects everybody worldwide. But I want to hear from people that are informed. Another big question is, how does the West think, the interests that run the West, they're going to get away with this? This is a big deal. Because our government and the NATO and EU government, when they couldn't economically and politically conquer Ukraine and suck it dry, they voted to not join. And so their elected government was overthrown with, quote, U.S. money. This is not U.S. money. This is the U.S. taxpayer money being used to do this by the globalists. But nevertheless, to start this whole process with Russia in a new Cold War, when Russia isn't communist anymore, they're certainly autocratic, and attacking Russia like this politically and economically and now militarily and trying to cut off their gas to Europe, their main funding mechanism, will only make them more authoritarian. So again, the globalist interests playing all the sides off against each other, they stand to gain out of crisis. Russia suffers, the U.S. suffers, Ukraine suffers. I want Ukraine for Ukrainians. They should be kicking the Russian government out and the Western governments out. And there was a movement to do that. So any Russians that have always been living in Ukraine, it's basically been part of Russia forever, who don't want to be enslaved by the new overthrow government that overthrew, they weren't elected, is a terrorist. But this very prime minister's people a month and a half ago were burning buildings and blowing stuff up, being called freedom fighters by our media. The same media that demonizes the family and the Second Amendment and private property rights, the same globalist media. I just want to point that out, that the Russians say that if they continue to invade these predominantly Russian cities, ethnically Russian, and continue killing people, and they're doing it every day at checkpoints, that the Russian military is going to invade that country. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. The point is that that's what they're going to do. Because 93% of Ukraine just got taken over by NATO and the EU in the overthrow government. Russia's grabbed about 7% of the country on their border that has their military bases and their pipelines, their gas pipelines and oil pipelines. The Russian infrastructure that supplies much of Europe's energy. Russia has had a very measured response, in my view, geopolitically to this, because they don't want to have a war with the West, a war that will cripple them, just like the war in Afghanistan for 10 years that was also staged by the West. Now, back then, the Soviet Union was very corrupt, very oppressive. Their political system was very evil. But still, I think it was immoral to use al-Qaeda from 1979 on. Reagan didn't start it. He just took credit for it, which is fine. Jimmy Carter and Zbigniew Brzezinski started it. That's declassified. Using al-Qaeda to attack not just Russian bases in Afghanistan, but Russian bases in surrounding countries. So the Russians poured in to deal with that threat, just like they've been fighting Western-backed al-Qaeda in areas like Chechnya. And the CIA, on record, funds radical Islam and al-Qaeda all over Russia. Just like they fund al-Qaeda to attack Syria, Libya, and Egypt. And when our former ally wouldn't go along with turning the country over to al-Qaeda, Hosni Mubarak, they arrested him. So I just want to point out, you got criminal banking interest above America and Europe using al-Qaeda, using the radical extreme Nazis that are the minority in the Ukraine. Ukraine's great folks in Western Ukraine, mainly Catholic. But the government is a ultra-nationalistic, so right-wing they're socialist. They go all around the political spectrum. They actually Heil Hitler at their meetings. I mean, this is so bizarre for me that if you say something mildly what they claim is racist, they will demonize you in the controlled media with political correctness. But then you've got the Ukrainian government where the deputy prime minister is in videos in a three-piece suit hailing Hitler. I mean, that's who this political party is. Ukraine was Nazi during World War II, for those that didn't know. And so they're Nazi again, and it is just unbelievable. Unbelievable that they then put out a story 2 weeks ago that, oh my gosh, synagogues, you know, there's a list of saying Jews get out of Eastern Ukraine. The Russians say, the Russians aren't persecuting any Jews. It's Western Ukraine that's doing that. But see, when it comes out that Western Ukraine is anti-Semitic, a lot of them, a large minority are, you just spin it and say, oh no, that's Russia. And they know the average American isn't paying attention. So I want to hear from you on this front. We're going to take calls the rest of the hour. Then I'm going to get into, because this is an example of mind control, an example of how political correctness is the new religion in this country. While we're all being discriminated against, black, white, Hispanic, old, young, Asian, I don't care, by General Electric running the White House Energy Council and Developmental Economic Council, they're exempt from the rules Obama put in 4 years ago that have shut down now more than 500 power plants in the country. Clean-burning coal plants that supplied 52% of our power. Now they supply about 31%. And when that gets down to about 10%, which they project in the next few years, you're going to have more than a doubling in your prices on average. But U.S. electricity prices may be going up for good. L.A. Times. Experts warn of growing fragility as coal plants are shut down, nuclear power is reduced, and consumers switch to renewable energy. Now, again, China gets 3 new plants a week. Mexico gets a new one every few weeks. Our jobs are all moving there because they have cheap energy. You cut off the energy, you cut off the country. That's a simple equation. There's no gas in your car, you don't go to work. There's no food in your tummy, you get a stomachache and start losing calories. You cut your leg off, you bleed to death, there's your oxygen energy, you die. Don't get a tourniquet on it. This country's legs cut off. Blood is spraying like fire hoses out of it. And this is discriminating against all of us under Agenda 21 and the UN treaty to shut America down. Cloward and Piven. Look it up. This is a plan. Obamacare is meant to shut the country down.
You are watching the best of the Alex Jones Show, weekdays from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central. Watch live at Infowars.com/show or become a member of InfoWarsNews.com and help us take resistance to the next level.